Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all tonight. I have just a brief introduction before we all get started. My name is Ixchel Rosal, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Student Life. And on behalf of the Office of University Life, I'd like to welcome you all to StorySpace. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Yes, thank you. As many of you know, or hopefully have heard, our office is focused on university as community. Our community is, of course, comprised of so many individual experiences, as unique as our many identities, whether student, parent, performer, or professor. Tonight's event creates a space for us to come together and share that which is personal, phenomenal, and collectively very powerful. We are excited to have so many speakers with us from many schools, all of whom our MC, Sahar Ullah, will introduce momentarily. Sahar is a PhD candidate and faculty fellow with Columbia's Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies. She also co-founded Hijabi Monologues 10 years ago as a, quote, theater space for the experiences of Muslim women to breathe as they are, a space that does not claim to tell every story and speak for every voice, end quote. We are so glad to have her voice along with all of our storytellers here tonight. Thank you from the Office of University Life for sharing your stories. And now, Sahar.
Good evening, everyone. Are you guys excited? Yeah. Well, today is going to be our very first story space, and hopefully there will be more to come. So if you're interested in submitting stories later on, please keep an eye out for that. We're really excited tonight because we have a wide range of storytellers from across the different schools at Columbia University. We have students from the School of the Arts, Columbia Business School, Columbia College, General Studies, and School of Professional Studies, and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. So please give them a round of applause. I'd like for the storytellers to stand up and face the audience. So tonight's theme is identity. Identity informs so much of how we view the world and how the world views us. Our first storyteller tonight is Anthony, who will be telling us about his journey to becoming an actor.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. This is nice. This is really like, it's awesome. Thank you guys for coming. So yeah, my name is Anthony Jadus. Everybody calls me Tony. I still have a hard time saying Tony. It's my name. Growing up, I had a really bad stutter, like to the point that I couldn't even get out my words or thoughts. And I was doing everything I was supposed to do. I took all the classes, and my mom had me see specialists, and it went away when I got to high school. And then in that point of our lives where we're juniors and seniors, you know, we're all thinking, what are we going to do with the rest of our lives? It came back again, and I was like, what the heck? I thought it was gone, you know? And so I went to college, and it kind of went away. It was always still a part of me, you know? But when I got to college, I was undecided what I wanted to do. I picked up philosophy as a major because, let's be honest, philosophy is just a bump up from undecided. And so I tried a whole bunch of stuff. I tried all the stuff that my mom and dad wanted me to do, like engineering and computers and science, and I failed at engineering and computers and science, and I tried film and English, and I tried an acting 1 class, you know, because I thought, what would get me out of my shell more than speaking in front of people in theater and comedy and improv, and I loved it. It was the coolest experience of my life. I kept doing it and trying it. I tried out for our musical, and I'm not really a singer, so that didn't go very well. But I did it, you know. I tried. I got into the first play audition for my junior year, and I got into the improv comedy team, which is getting up in front of complete strangers and making up stuff on the spot. So it was all this stuff that I tried to do to put myself out of my comfort zone the most that I could. My senior year came around, and the acting thing was going really well, but I still wasn't in the spot that I wanted to be because I didn't get a few roles. And so it was this point in my life where I thought, what do I want to do, you know? I can keep trying this acting thing, which I'm falling in love with. And so I did. You know, I applied to all the schools. I applied to NYU, I applied to Yale, I applied to Penn State, and I applied here, obviously. And I think looking back at it now, one last story I'll say is that in my undergraduate school, we were in this acting competition, right? It was the first play from my university to get to go that I was a part of. and I played this dead soldier. So for 9.5 hours, for 4 showings of the show, I was dressed in blood and mud and grass and tears and everything else, and I sat backstage for 9 hours as a dead soldier, and I thought at the end of the day, I want to do this for the rest of my life, if that makes any sense at all. So now that I'm here, I'm going to keep pushing myself and going forward and tackling everything that comes my way. And thank you guys again. This is great.
Next up, we have Kiara, who will be talking about giving it your all in the face of failure.
Hi, my name is Kiara Key, and I'm currently a master's student in construction administration at Columbia University, and I'm here to tell you a story today. So you see, until the age of 17, there was pretty much only one thing in my life, and that was ballet. I danced when kids around me were in school and danced about 6 hours a day on school days and 10 hours on non-school days. So this whole ballet thing persisted on for about 10 years. And that was pretty much because my mom forced me into ballet. And it was either ballet and TV or ballet and no ballet and an unhappy mother. And if you know anything about Chinese mothers in general, you don't want an unhappy mama. So for about 10 years in my life, ring or sun, I went to a professional ballet school, knowing I would never become a ballerina. And I'm not being pessimistic here. This was in actual fact agreed by most people around me. My instructor, for instance, hated me. He openly shared with everyone, Kiara, you have a better chance becoming a boxer than a ballerina. And my peers similarly didn't see me as part of the pack, never. They always tried to comfort my partner across the room during practice by saying, it's okay, I'll go with her next time. Like I can't hear them even though I'm standing right next to my partner, right? So you might ask, did you do anything to try to change the situation? Of course I did. I did everything from kicking, yelling, crying, to not sleeping, to licking an ice sculpture, knowing that my tongue might be stuck to it forever. And what happened? Nothing really happened. Mom was a pretty tough cookie. But don't get me wrong here. Although I never wanted to be in that classroom, I went to every single ballet classroom wholeheartedly. And I'm not some kind of Forrest Gump here. It was pretty much based on 2 ideas, because first, my mom paid for it. Second, I'm already here. Might as well make the most out of it. So what did I do? I was always the first one in, last one out. I stretched whenever, wherever possible. I was on public transportation, stretching. Imagine the kind of attention I would get. And also, I just always practice. And my toes were going into the cycle of bleeding, breaking, healing. There was a toe cycle. I just kept on going and going and going. So finally, now I'm getting to the thesis question of my story. What if you know you're not going to get anything out of something? Would you still persist and try hard, given you can't back out of it? Can you persist knowing you will fail? My ballet story may seem slightly distant to some of you sitting here, but think about it. We're all and will be that ugly duckling in that classroom at least once in our life without a choice. So will you still try hard in that required writing class, knowing you can never write as well as native speakers just because you just arrived in this country? Will you still set and strive for goals, knowing you hate your unreasonable job, but cannot afford to look for a second option because you're a single parent supporting 2 kids? Will you still be taking care of a dying cancer patient with a terrible attitude, knowing no matter how hard you try, you're going to lose him or her very soon? Sorry, have to flip my script a little bit. So there's so many situations we're stuck in without a choice. And I think, in my opinion, because I'm from China, I think this scenario can be best described by a Chinese saying called 身不由己. And the direct translation for 身不由己 is your body is not in the control of yourself. So what if today you're sitting here going through your 身不由己moment? Well, I can't tell you what to do because what do I know? But what I can tell you is what has happened to me after I persisted through my simple yoji ballet life. So the day I turned 17, as promised, my mom said, okay, fine, you can quit now. You don't need to go back. I thought that was going to be the happiest day of my life. But was it really? No. Even up to today, that was the day I felt most empty out of all my days alive. And as I was walking out of the classroom, my teacher ran to me and he hugged me. I was like, whoa, that was the kind of hug you would give to those really talented kids. You know, those kids who would just, never include me as part of the pact. And he said one thing to me. He said, Kiara, you will always have a part of ballet in you. At the time, I was like, yeah, he was just trying to be nice because he shamefully bullied me for the past 10 years. But today, reflecting upon the past 10 years, I think I'm starting to understand a little bit about the truth behind what he was trying to tell me. So I'm about to show off a little bit. Please don't hate on me. The year I turned 19, I sold up my first medical startup. Working on that startup was nothing but frustrations and solving problems. I had angry partners, angry suppliers. At points, people were pointing at my nose, doubting my integrity. But I never once thought we would not pull it through because I did it wholeheartedly. And after my undergrad study, I solo traveled to 41 places, taking on long-distance hikes. One of my first hikes was in South America, and for about 2 weeks. Every part of my body was dying, and friends and family thought I was crazy, just like always. But I did it. I did it because I did it wholeheartedly. And finally, I started a nonprofit organization about 4 years ago in helping kids with their road system and education system in Cambodia and Laos. Every few years, I go back. And every time I go back, I'm always under the sun 10 hours a day. And I'm just working, hammering tiles with mud water going up to my knees. And you might be like, how do you do it? And I'm not even eating good food there. I'm surviving on crickets and drinking very watery Cambodian beers. But just like everything else, I have been doing and will always be doing this nonprofit wholeheartedly. So, reflecting on my life post-ballet, I begin to understand what my teacher meant by, Kiara, you will always have a part of ballet in you. I will never become a ballerina, but through dancing, I've learned and am still learning about the art of perseverance, the art of not caring too much about unhelpful criticisms, and the art of giving it your all, even though you know you might fail from the very beginning. What ballet has gifted me is not the direct art of dancing, but the confidence of doing things wholeheartedly. So going to the question I posed earlier, what if you know you're not going to get anything out of something? Would you still persist and try hard, given you can't back out of it? I humbly suggest you to explore the option of making the most out of that situation, because at the end, you will receive gifts you have never imagined before. And I promise you, those gifts will be always part of you, just like how ballet will always be a part of me. And this is my identity story. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Jan, who will be speaking to us about an unexpected encounter during the 2005 Israeli disengagement from Gaza.
I remember the first time I met my best friend. She asked me where I was from, and I said, and she interrupted me and said, me too. This moment reminds me of the time when I'm 6 years old, and I'm standing in this room in the Orthodox synagogue in Cologne, Germany, where I was born and raised. And the rabbi is standing there in full gear, and he's reviewing my application documents to become a member of the synagogue. And he shakes his head, and he turns to my mother and I, and he says, no, this won't do. This boy has not been circumcised the right way. He's going to have to get a recircumcision. And I don't know what it means to get circumcised the right way, but no knife ever came near me, and I did not become a member of the Orthodox synagogue in Cologne. Nearly a decade later, I'm now 15 years old, and I'm in history class in my high school in Cologne. For the last couple of months, we've been discussing Germany's role in World War II. Just as the class is about to start, the history teacher comes to my desk and almost as if she's telling me a secret, leans in and whispers. And she says, "Jon, would you mind waiting outside today? We're watching a movie on concentration camps, and I think the other students would feel more comfortable if you waited outside. I'm sure you'll understand." Now, at this point, it's important to note that I was the only Jew in my class. I was actually the only Jew in my school. And I'm pretty sure I did not understand what she meant, but I obliged. And I went outside, and I was in the hallway, long empty hallway, and I heard the sound of the narrator muffled through the doors telling them everything about the concentration camps. And the only thing I could think about was, man, I'm looking forward to summer camp. See, for the last couple of years, I've been going to this summer camp that was hosted by this Jewish organization in Canada. And this year was going to be our big trip. This year, we're all going to go to Israel and meet other summer camps from the same organization and have a lot of fun together. So a couple of weeks later, we go to Israel, and the first week, survival training. We are in the Golan Heights, which is the northern part of Israel, and we build mud huts, and we build clay ovens, and we built rafts, and it's amazing. And there's people from the organization from all around the world, and I feel so great. At the end of the week, we have our initiation ceremony. At the initiation ceremony, you become a member of the organization. And as a souvenir, as a token that now you belong, now you're a member of this Jewish youth organization, we get these blue shirts and we sing a song, because that's what you do at summer camp. And the next day, we mount the bus wearing our blue shirts, and we go off toward the south. The next stop on our itinerary, the Dead Sea, southeast of Israel. So we continue riding on the bus from the northeast, and continue going south and south. And we're bopping on the bus, and we're going down. And I look out the window just as we're approaching Jerusalem, and there's this big wall. It's a strange sight, like a big wall in the middle of nowhere. And it continues going, and I turn to the neighbor next to me and I say, "What's this wall for?" And he says, "I don't know." And we ask all the other people on the bus, and they don't know. So we start asking the soldiers that were on the front of the bus who were there to protect us on this trip. At this point, it's important to note that the year is 2005. And for those of you that don't know, 2005 was a time of disengagement in Israel. And that's a time when nerves were blank. It's a time when there's this big conflict over whether or not the settlements in the occupied territories in the West Bank and Gaza were legal or illegal. And there's two groups of Jews. There's the more liberal Jews who said that the settlements in the occupied territories were not legal and that the Jews should dismantle and get out. There's the other group of Jews, a bit more conservative Jews, and they thought that Jews had a right to be in those territories and therefore they should not dismantle and they should stay there and actually expand their settlements. Tensions were running so high, I could see it in the soldiers' faces. That was a big conflict. It tore apart families. The important thing to know is this. The people that were for the disengagement, for the settlements to be dismantled, that summer they wore blue shirts. And the people that were against the settlement being dismantled, for the settlements to expand, they wore orange shirts. So we continue driving, and we're hungry. And we tell the bus driver that we want to stop to eat. So we stop just outside Jerusalem in this big food court, and we get off the bus, 30, 15-year-olds wearing our blue shirts, accompanied by 4 Israeli army soldiers with semi-automatic machine guns. And I open the door to the food court, and I don't know whether it was the sun that was blinding my eyes, but the first thing that I see in the food court is this vast sea of orange. Hundreds and hundreds of people in the center of the food court, dressed in orange t-shirts, loudly eating their dinners, engaging in conversation. And there was some force that stopped us from getting any closer to them. They were just this unidentifiable mass in the distance, and we just kind of assembled in the front. And one of my friends joked that maybe a soccer match was on, but no one laughed. And we were standing there, and suddenly the orange people from very far away, they notice the blue people on the other side, and they start getting quieter and quieter, and they start getting even quieter until this room of hundreds and hundreds of people starts getting pin drop silent, and you couldn't hear a single thing. And I wouldn't have gotten nervous if I hadn't looked to my left, where the soldier that we first asked about this engagement. And you know, soldiers in Israel, they see a lot of stuff. They see war, they see death. And surely, you know, this is not a serious situation, but this guy, he was holding on to his machine gun like it was nothing, and I saw a drop of sweat going down his face, and I know this situation is serious. So moments before the whole situation erupts, he yells at us, he says, "Everyone, back to the bus, now!" And in obedience scene, never before or after, we all go out and we leave. And we're on the bus again, and we're going south toward the Dead Sea, and we're stupefied. We're quiet. We have no idea what just happened. We stare at the seat in front of us, and we're shocked. We get to the Dead Sea. We have a quiet night. None of us really talks. We eat something. Finally, we're really hungry. And we wake up before sunrise because we're going to go and climb the mountain that's right next to the Dead Sea, because that's the next point of the itinerary. And for some reason, we decide to continue wearing our blue shirts, the blue shirts that we got at survival camp, and we hike up the mountain. No one really talks at this point. It's also really early in the morning. The sun hasn't risen yet. And we get to the top of a hill, and we look down on the Dead Sea. The sun still hasn't risen. And for some reason, one of us feels compelled to start singing an old camp song, the song that we sang at the initiation ceremony, and then more people start joining in, and then I start joining in, and then everyone starts joining in, and I look at all the people around me, and I really like these people, and I feel so strong. And then the sun rises, and it illuminates the Dead Sea into this bright orange. And I remember the second question that my later best friend asked me when I met her in college. She said, "So, Jon, are you a Jew or are you not a Jew?" And I didn't have the words then, but I think I have the words now. See, I'm not either a Jew or not a Jew. I'm Jew-ish. Thanks, guys.
Our next storyteller is Hadia. Hadia will be talking to us about how soccer has shaped her identity.
Hi, everyone. So I grew up in Pakistan, and I think it's a country that tends to make headlines for all the wrong reasons. So you probably know it because of its socioeconomic problems, or the fact that it has one of the most abject, records of violations of women and girls' human rights. But what's really interesting is that even in a place that can seem completely devoid of hope, sometimes ordinary people, like a mathematics school teacher, his daughter, and her 13-year-old friends, can do something quite extraordinary. And it all starts with a soccer ball. So in this story, it's 2001. It is about 2:30 in the afternoon in the middle of May. And the sun, this is a merciless sun. Like New York City's heat wave has nothing on it. And it is beating down on this cracked cement floor that is supposed to be the basketball court that we play on. And we just finished basketball practice, so I'm helping gather all the basketballs and clean up. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a soccer ball escapes from the duffel bag, and it rolls right into the middle of the court. And I run over to it. And for some strange reason, I decide to kick it. And I watch as it sails right across in this perfect arc, straight into my coach's hands, and she's shocked. And then she says, "We have got to get you playing football," which is what we call soccer in Pakistan. Growing up in a country like Pakistan, I knew that it was just amazing for me to be able to play sports at all, even if it was inside the four walls of my school. Because women and girls are not meant to be seen, they are not meant to be heard, and they are certainly not supposed to be running around playing soccer. It is a land where there are invisible signs that barricade women and girls from entry into almost every aspect of life. So we didn't have, state-of-the-art gyms or soccer camp or lush fields to practice on or polished hardwood floors. We basically woke up at the crack of dawn to find empty parks, which were basically drought-stricken, so there was like a tuft of dead brown grass somewhere, and ripped nets in the soccer field in the goalposts. Or you played in the middle of the afternoon where the sun was basically trying to cook you well done, because that was the only time we could play without attracting attention from the men and boys. And it didn't matter how hot it was, you had to wear an oversized shirt and baggy pants because you had to do whatever you could to avoid the wagging tongues and the judgmental stares. And we did all of it for the love of the sport. And for me personally, in a land of closed windows and doors and minds, soccer meant freedom. So that year, I played my heart out, and I watched hours and hours of these recordings of soccer matches that my dad got me. And then I would practice basically in our garage because I couldn't do it outside, and the scuff marks are still there on that wall from that year of hours of just me learning to kick and trap and dribble the ball. I remember that the most amazing thing was that my cheerleaders and coaches and champions were the most unlikely suspects in a country like Pakistan. They were my parents. So there was my mother, who would ignore all the commentary from the neighbors who were very concerned about how tan I was getting. And then there was my dad. Imagine a 40-something, gray-haired mathematics school teacher with glasses, driving through hours of the most brutal traffic jams you can imagine, sleeping in a car with no air conditioning, outside parks, so that I didn't miss a single practice, so I didn't miss a single match. And he did it because he knew that there were always going to be voices that told me I couldn't, I shouldn't, I wouldn't. But we did. We did that year. So for the first time in the history of that city, 4 schools came together and there was an inter-school girls tournament for soccer. And my team won, and that's a great story. And I can tell you, great stories about like leadership and teamwork and what I learned on the field. But I think the most important thing for me was learning to play soccer on an unequal footing in an inherently unequal place, because that was the best training that I could have gotten for life, which is the greatest unequal playing field that we are ever going to be on. And that's what brought me as an 18-year-old to this country with just a suitcase and a map and instructions on how to get to campus. It was that carried me through the most bizarre situations where there were always people telling me that I couldn't, I shouldn't, I wouldn't, because I was a woman, I was a minority, I was a foreigner, I was an immigrant. And I realized that the answer to that is always going to be, I can, I have, and I will. Thank you.
Next up, we have Daniel, who will talk to us about IKEA SWEDE.
We'll do this. Hello, my name is Daniel Bergerson, though that may change soon. I'm a senior in Columbia College studying history and teaching, and about a year ago I had the opportunity to study that in Santiago, Chile. So back in August of last year, I was packing up all my stuff, had my clothes, like a full library about multicultural education in my suitcase, and I had everything except one thing that I was required to bring. My study abroad coordinator had asked me to bring a gift that represents my home for the Chilean family about to welcome me into theirs. And I was stumped. The stereotypical Minnesotan stuff where I'm from, like, Paul Bunyan keychains and twins baseball caps, had nothing to do with my life because I wasn't like a baseball player or someone who cut down trees, lumberjack. And the stuff that was actually part of my adolescence in Minneapolis, like Zimbabwean marimbas and Chipotle burritos, were from someone else's culture. I mean, not really Chipotle, but it definitely wasn't Swedish-American enough to like represent me, because my mom was born and lived the first half of her life in a small town outside of Stockholm called Västerhaninge. And so I was there the last year. I was stumped. I didn't know what to bring. And then the day of my departure, my mom assured me, we'll just find something on the way to the airport. And like usual, she was right. Like 10 minutes from the terminal, I found the perfect metaphor for my identity. It was a big blue billboard with 4 yellow letters printed in all caps, IKEA. For those of you who don't know IKEA, it's like a Swedish superstore, chock full of like do-it-yourself furniture and lingonberry jam and like doomed relationships. And I thought, like, perfect, like, this is me. And so And so we parked in the Mall of America parking lot. I ran up the escalator into IKEA, past the free child care center. It's clearly not like a US company. And I went straight for the sour gummies because I knew that I had loved eating those sour gummies as a kid, so that's what I chose as my gift. And a little bit later, I was up in the air in the window seat of the plane, opened up my bag of the sour gummies, and the taste really put me in a nostalgic mood. And I was looking out the window and I saw like this once gigantic IKEA, now just a speck against the Minnesota countryside. And I was wondering, like, why on earth in my search for a gift that represented my home did I turn to like the world's largest furniture retailer that operates in like 47 countries, probably including Chile. And I was confused. Like, shouldn't my identity or cultural heritage be more than like vaguely Swedish-sounding products? Like I thought I had more Swedish cred than that, considering that like my mom is Swedish, and I had like spoken it for a while, and I spent like every summer of my childhood there until a certain point. I thought that like I could do better than that. So I was chewing on this candy in the window seat, and I just kind of started thinking and looking back and realizing that like a lot of that Swedishness had really slipped away without me ever noticing. Like at age 5, we stopped speaking Swedish at home because my father never learned the language. And at 12, we stopped visiting Västerhaninge at all because most of my mom's family passed away by then. And I guess by 20, I was like in the IKEA candy bins, like searching for something that would bring back the taste of Västerhaninge for $7.99 a pound. And like I just realized something. I mean, maybe you've heard of like an Olive Garden Italian. I had become like an official IKEA Swede. You know, like someone who only connects to the lowest common denominator of Swedish culture through buying like mass-produced merchandise. And that made me pretty sad, right? Because like I was like, isn't identity more than a brand name? And I started to like recognize this imbalance in my life, you know, between my like Minnesotan father and me being Minnesotan, and my Swedish mother and me not really being Swedish anymore. And that imbalance really only grew throughout the next semester because I was studying in Santiago and I loved it. And I was learning Spanish and I was like writing songs with Chilean idioms and I was like writing papers about Chilean history and politics. But like all the while I was like, I don't know any of this stuff about Sweden. Like I couldn't talk to you for more than 5 minutes about what's going on there, but I like have given multiple 20-minute presentations about Santiago. And I was also writing papers about deculturalization as like a history student, planning to be a teacher. I had some academic theories about like why a person might, like me, like a second-generation immigrant, might end up as an IKEA Swede or something like that. And I had like different arguments. I was saying like, you know, of course, like neoliberalism. Like neoliberalism is like privatizing public space and thus community spaces, and in that way it's like pushing cultural expression into the private sector, like the commercial sector specifically, and that's for profit. And like I thought that makes sense. Like I believe that hypothesis, but it didn't really give me any answers about like my own family and my own story. So I resolved to speak with my mother when I went back for winter break and ask her all the questions that I had never really bothered to ask her. So come Christmas time, we're sitting on the sofa watching Law & Order reruns like well-adjusted Americans, and and so I wait for a commercial, and then I just turn and ask my mother, like, Mom, what was Christmas like when you were a kid? And it's amazing how just like one question can open up a person, because she started talking about like backyard games with her cousins and sleepovers at Murmur Vegas, like my great-grandmother. And like the time that she brought a rabbit home and like hid it in her room. And before long, she was also telling me about like at 15 years old how she hated high school and how she marched into the principal's office and just told him like, I quit. And I had never known that like my mom was like a badass rebel. And as a teacher who has like a love-hate relationship with schools, like I was inspired and I connected with her in a different way. I had never known that part of her before, and it felt really good to be hearing all these stories. She continued to tell like the rest of her life story, basically up until my birth that night on the sofa with Law & Order paused on the TiVo, and she told me the rest of her story up until my birth, and she reminded me that I, Daniel Bergerson, am named after her little brother, Daniel Romstrom, who died at 18 in a car crash. And I had already known that. She had told me that before, but for the first time I cried about it. I had never really realized or kind of like, I don't know, like given the appropriate thought to the fact that like my mom has all of these experiences and memory and family and language and culture and everything that she left behind to move to my father's city in Minneapolis, and how much I knew about my father's childhood, but how little I knew about my mother's. And so again, that imbalance made me feel quite empty in a way. And before long, I was back in Santiago for a second semester, and I was at the University of Chile. And for the first class, they were passing out an attendance sheet. And so my compañeros were writing like Camilo Caro Zuniga, Valentina Stark Gutierrez. And I wrote Daniel Bergerson. At first I didn't write anything, right? And I kind of realized like, whoa, this is just like a blank in my life, you know, not just the name, but also everything that comes with that. So I wrote my name, Daniel Bergerson Romstrom, with the umlaut on the O and everything. And it felt good, and it felt right. And come this Christmas time, I'm going to ask my family for their blessing to make that my legal name. And it's a symbolic change, but it's a start. I'm starting to learn Swedish again. If I go to grad school, it'll be in Stockholm. Because I'd like to be more than an IKEA Swede again. Because identity is like IKEA furniture. You can't miss a piece. Thank you.
So I believe when I introduced Daniel, I said that he would tell you a story about IKEA SWEDE. Maybe that was a little slippage. Our next storyteller is another Anthony, and this Anthony will tell us about his experiences of ups and downs on his way to Columbia University.
Hopefully I can speak loud enough. I'm not used to the mic, but so I guess I'll just start off with identity is unique. It's unique to all of us, and I truly don't think I've found where I belong with regards to identity, but I think Columbia is going to get me there. And so I'll walk you through a very quick, brief snippet of my life and how it is I'm developing this sense of identity. I grew up in New Jersey, right across the river, born and raised in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I grew up as a foster child in a very abusive home. At 2 years old, my mother broke several of my bones and like really took me down this path, me and my younger brother, which was 1 at the time, and brought us down this path of something that, you know, developed a destructive human being. You know, up until the age of 17, I was extremely destructive. I was incarcerated for upwards of 5 years as a juvenile. And I didn't know where I was going to go. I had absolutely no idea. I spent a lot of time in a cell, whether it be in a foster home, in a room, not being loved as a child, right? So these are very unique things that are unique to childhood and development, or being in a cell as a teenager and figuring out, like, where do I belong as a man? How do I develop myself? How do I grow? How do I prosper? So what I did was a lot of introspection. I didn't know what I was doing, but now I'm able to contextualize it, and that's what I was doing. I sat there and thought about where I want to be, where do I want to go, how do I prosper, how do I become a man, and not just this destructive human being. So I converted myself from this destructive human being to a constructive human being, and I did that through thought process, and I used the military. The military was my conduit. I spent nearly a decade in the military. I took what I was inherently, which was a fighter. I grew up fighting in the inner city of New Jersey in some very rough places. I've probably been in several hundred fights, fist fights, and you name it. You think about it, whatever spins in your head, I've probably been there, done that. But what I took away from that was the ability to thrive in some of the worst environments. And I took that and moved it into the military, and I moved into the special operations realm of the military. And it's really what took this idea of being a fighter, and it gave me discipline, it gave me structure, it gave me all the things that we find as a human being that define us, right? That move us from this very like chaotic human being to a very structured human being, and I feel very much benefited from that. And then what I did with that after 8.5, nearly 9 years of military service, having been in Afghanistan, all throughout Southeast Asia, several deployments, seen combat, seen life, seen death, seen all these different things that change the human dynamic. I took that, moved it into Columbia. So for me, identity is unique. It's difficult. It's something that I think we all tangle with, as much as we like to think that we know who we are, regardless of where you're at, where you've been, and what age you are right now. I think it's something that's going to continue to evolve you as a person. You're always going to be introspective in nature. I myself am such. And all I want to say is persevere. Persevere in the hardest, most difficult situations, because that's all we can do. All these stories are beautiful, and I feel appreciative to get to share mine just a little bit. And at the end of the day, perseverance, I think, is what defines us as human beings, and it is what makes us truly find our identity. So thank you.
How many of you are inspired? Excellent. Well, prepare to be inspired again. Our next story warrior is Aspen, who will share with us a survival story which ended her initial college experience.
Hi, my name is Aspen. I grew up in suburban Massachusetts. I had two very loving, caring parents who were happily married, both lawyers. It was a very stable home. Two loving older brothers who took really good care of me and were very protective. I'd never had to move. I was never shaken or uprooted in any way. Truly nothing traumatic had ever happened in my life. I'd had a really, really, really lucky life. Until I went to college. I decided I wanted to go to school 2,000 miles away from where I'd grown up, in Colorado Springs, Colorado, of all places. I went to Colorado College, a small liberal arts school of about 2,000 kids. And I wanted to go there because I wanted to reinvent myself, because I'd always been kind of shy and introverted, and I wanted to be cool, and I didn't want anyone to know that I'd always been kind of like quiet, and I wanted to just like reinvent myself, and I was really excited to arrive in this new place far away. And on my second night of college, I had a few friends over, a few new other freshmen over in my dorm room, and we watched The Breakfast Club, and I was feeling really like confident and cool, and we smoked weed. It was my second time ever smoking weed. And two of the kids left, but the third stayed. And on my second night of my freshman year of college, I was raped. And I was devastated. It really shattered my whole new beginning, and I no longer felt safe in this new home, and I wasn't really sure what to do. And so I reported the rape to the college. And the administration discouraged me from going to the police and encouraged me to go through the school's conflict mediation process, as if a violent felony could be mediated, like a playground fight. But I did. I listened to them, and I testified, and he testified, and the mediator found him to be innocent, which meant that they didn't believe me, and they allowed him to remain on campus, and they actually moved me off of campus. And at that point, I realized that my school was not going to help me, and there was really nothing that my family could do to help me. And they moved me into this like stained cinder block motel beyond the edge of campus that students called the Cinder Block Palace, which was like where you lived if you got like the worst number in the housing lottery. And I could have curled up in the fetal position and sort of just stayed there and atrophied. But I decided that I wasn't going to do that. And I think in the aftermath of a trauma, you have a choice. You can stay and wallow and feel sorry for yourself and kind of shrivel, or you can do something. And I decided I needed to help myself. I needed to leave this place, and I needed to go somewhere where I felt safe. And I decided that I was going to walk from Mexico to Canada along a 2,650-mile long continuous footpath called the Pacific Crest Trail that goes through the Anza-Borrego Desert, and then the Sonoran Desert, then the Mojave Desert along the LA Aqueduct, up through the High Sierra Mountains, and then into the volcano lands of Northern California and the Cascade Mountains. And I was going to do this alone with a backpack on, and I was going to pitch my tent every night and survive on my own to prove to myself that I was strong and capable of taking care of myself, and that I was safe in the world, in the body that I had to keep living in. And so I did. I showed up at the Mexican border with a little 11-pound backpack with a sleeping bag and a tent and lots of candy and 5 water bottles and totally inadequate nutrition, just mostly sugar. And I started walking, and on my first day I saw a rattlesnake, and I nearly stepped on it, and I screamed and I shrieked, and I ran back south 100 yards, and then I was like, there are going to be a lot of rattlesnakes, and I'm going to have to just get used to it. This is what I've signed myself up for. And I stepped over that snake, and I kept going, and I stepped over another and another, and it's amazing how quickly anything can become normal. And I pitched my tent each night, and I rationed my food, and at one point I ran out of food, and I had to hike 64 miles without food with a backpack on. I was like emaciated, and I kept going, and I crossed 220 miles of snow through the High Sierra, and I really earned my own respect. I again and again and again proved to myself that I was capable of taking care of myself, and again I was in situations where I was alone with a man or a group of men in the woods, because about 400 people attempt this walk every year, and 90% of them are men. And again, I found that these men were respectful. And if I said no, I wasn't comfortable with something, they honored that. And my no was audible. My voice was audible. And I really learned that rape is not normal. And most people are basically good. And I began to feel safe in my body again. And by the time I reached Canada and crossed a border in the Pine Woods, I knew what I wanted to do, and that was to finish college. And here I am. Thank you.
How about we all just pause a little bit and take a breath and release. Storytelling is what I tell some of my students and mentees is a lot like gift giving. Storytellers give, and the audience often gives back, right? So just keep giving to our storytellers, because they're giving you a lot tonight. Our next story warrior is Yuvraj. Yuvraj will share with us why he's decided to be well-rounded instead of an expert.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yuvraj Singh, and I'm a first-year graduate student at SEPA. I grew up in a very small, under-resourced family, but with a lot of ambitions. They wanted to live through me vicariously. So, since the very beginning, I was pushed to do all those activities and take all those classes that they were not able to do, or that they thought was necessary for me to be successful. So the struggle of being an all-rounder began at a very early age. And oh my God, it's not fun at all. Every year, I was pushed to take different classes at school. Every semester, every winter break, I was asked to take different activities. I mean, you name it, from cricket to flute lessons, drama to astronomy, political science to painting, I was changing my career goals once a year at least, if not twice. And all this while, my friends were honing on their skills and shaping their career goals. And amongst this confusion of what path to take and this impatience of how to define my identity, I decided that I am going to be the Prime Minister of India. Why, you ask? Because it's cool and it's powerful. But most importantly, because it did not require you to be an expert at one given thing. So guided by others' wishes and commands, I was dead set on this end goal. I had no roadmap. And before I could figure out how to get there, my parents came up with another suggestion. They suggested that I should take some STEM courses before graduating high school. And surprisingly enough, I did. As a result, I applied and got into Georgia Institute of Technology, officially majoring in aerospace engineering. To catch you up, now I'm studying to become an astronaut. Right. Continuing, halfway through the semester, the department head of aerospace engineering pulls me aside in a meeting and he's like, Yuvraj, I think you should drop aerospace and you should instead do industrial and systems engineering. Because supposedly I had some aptitude for operational mathematics. Do you think I listened to him? You bet I did. For the first time in my life, someone told me that I was good at something, and they mentored me accurately. And I was not going to let that feeling go away. But switching majors would have meant I would have to justify this decision to my friends, family, and colleagues. I did not want to appear fickle-minded at the least. So what did I do? I told everyone I'm doing a double major in aerospace and industrial. And to seem really convincing, I even attended classes for both the majors. I mean, it just about killed me. At a point, I ran out of energy and I gave up on aerospace publicly. In my mind, I was doing the right thing. I was going on this path which could be my way of becoming an expert at something. I was more confident than ever before. So, that said, I still was uncomfortable because I thought that I might have disappointed those around me. So, how do I tackle with this potentially destructive obstacle? I kind of walled myself in from everyone's negative opinions and doubts about my goals, but I kept the door ajar for those who had an open mind and who were encouraging. At this moment of time, I was working hard to be an industrial engineer. Political dreams fell on the back burner, but I never let the flame out. It's quite frustrating to know that you're a jack of all but master of none. You're a generalist in a world which is increasingly seeking specialists. You might be good enough to survive, but not great enough to have an impact, to bring a change, or to begin a revolution, which I really wanted to, for some reason. But until and unless you realize and materialize on your potential. While I was walking on this self-constructed path, things started to take a positive turn. Towards the end of my time at Georgia Tech, I got the opportunity to work with World Food Program. It's the largest humanitarian agency whose purpose it was to deliver food and aid to people in conflict zones and disaster-hit areas. And I, the master of none, but jack of all, was assigned to pull together a team. I pulled together a team of 6 students, 2 who were masters of computing, 2 who were masters of policy analysis, 2 who were masters of optimization in supply chain. Over the next 8 months, we worked day and night. We analyzed everything that World Food Program did. While all these experts were focusing on their individual tasks, I was jumping around one thing to another. I had the bigger picture in my mind. I wanted to have that end goal where we could help World Food Program. We did. We saved World Food Program $34 million. We assisted them in reaching 3 million more people in less than half the time. And the most surprising thing was that my teammates and my faculty advisor came and told me that It's because of you. You pulled all of these wonderful people together. And that was it. It was a moment of epiphany. Being a jack of all was an advantage. My dynamic education and upbringing gave me the ability to think about multiple things at one point. I could look at things from a variety of perspectives which others probably had a little bit of a difficulty. The path of becoming a leader suddenly became a bit more clear. I know that I'm not the best engineer. I know that I'm not the best policy analyst, and I never will be. I know for a fact that I will never be the best writer. But I know that I can do all of these things and more, just well enough to be an impactful leader. Yours truly, industrial engineer, policy analyst, somewhat of a writer, master of none but jack of all, Yuvraj Singh. Thank you.
Oh, this is better. Our next storyteller is Michael. Michael will be telling us about his quirky personality.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael. Thanks for coming. So for high school, I went to this small all-boys school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. We had to wear blazers and ties, and our shirts had to be tucked in at all times. We weren't actually boys, we were gentlemen. But I wasn't actually a gentleman. I was a little bit more than that. I was God. I was given this nickname during my first year of high school, and it just happened to stick throughout my entire time there. Literally everyone in the school would call me this name, even my teachers. My favorite English teacher, every time I would walk into the class, would literally stand up in his sweater vest and blazer as well, and put his hands against his chest, give me a slight bow. I would walk by him, and in reality, what I really wanted to say was like, "Are you fucking kidding me, really?" But like, I would just give him like a fake smile and just move on. Kids would say things like, "How many lives did you save today, God?" Or when it was cold and rainy outside, "Why are you trying to punish us today, God? Please forgive us." Yeah, it was pretty ridiculous. I don't know the origin story of this name. I think part of it started because of just, boys being boys and us trying to poke fun at each other any chance we got. But this name was extremely confusing to me because while it seems like maybe I'm this social guy who has a lot of friends and is called God, that's actually the exact opposite of the truth. I was this extremely anxious and depressed kid who was constantly closed off and lost in his head. I barely had any close friends, and so this constantly made me ask the question, just why the fuck were my peers calling me God? Yeah, so despite how awkward and self-conscious this absurd name made me feel, it was also kind of flattering in a way. It pointed to other parts of my identity that were good. And so yeah, back in high school, I was one of the top students in my class, which definitely earned me some respect among my peers. And by respect, I mean they would come up to me before math or physics class and ask to cheat off of me and copy my homework. I found this funny and disheartening because they would actually refer to me by my last name, Harley, when they would ask to do this. But immediately after they were done cheating off of me, they would go back to their old ways and say something like, "Thanks, you saved my life today, God." Yeah, and yeah, I didn't know what to really make out of all of this, but I did it anyways, even though it went against my morals, because at the end of the day, all I really wanted to do was to connect with the people around me, and that was one of the only ways I knew how back then. But God supposedly isn't just smart. He's attractive too. One day, my classmate, who's gay, posted a list in our locker room of who he thought the hottest guys in our grade were. And just keep in mind, I went to a school where there were 25 kids in my grade, so I'm not bragging at all. But I just happened to be at the top of this list, and being number one just drew more unwanted attention to me. So yeah, and lastly, I think at the end of the day, like the real reason I was called God was because of who I was. I was this kind, generous, thoughtful, and hardworking kid. And I think everyone in high school saw this in me. I just didn't see this in myself back then. So a few years ago when I was at Northwestern University, I was diagnosed with a nonverbal learning disability. For those of you who don't know, a nonverbal learning disability affects the right prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is involved in picking up on social cues and understanding facial expressions, as well as other very important executive functioning tasks. But this diagnosis was actually a great relief to me because it finally explained why I struggled all these years to connect with people, the people who are all around me, and make meaningful relationships and have them last and all that good stuff. Yeah, so overcoming this disability has been a constant struggle. I've lived in Chicago, Vancouver, and my home, New York, over the past 5 years, just kind of aimlessly bouncing around, not really knowing who I was or what I wanted to do. It's pretty directionless most of the time. But then I discovered the concept of neuroplasticity, which just means simply the brain's ability to change. And this really excited me. And after hearing about this, I knew what I needed to do. So I attended this program where I attempted to change my brain, and it worked. I achieved the one thing I was never capable of, connection. And now I see the world in a completely new way. And I think I finally, more or less, understand why I was called God. I think my peers gave me this nickname that I couldn't hide from because it was their only way to connect with me. And that's the main point, that I've always been someone who is worth connecting with. But life is funny. Just recently, one of my friends from high school texted me to congratulate me on getting to the School of General Studies. It's my first year here. He went on to point out that Obama had gone to GS. His next text read, "Looks like there are big things in store for your future, ... I was in my room at the time, and I just looked at my phone and laughed. Honestly, I wasn't that surprised, even though it's been 6 years. And then I asked myself the question, what would be the easier job right now, being president or being God? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Sayan. Sayan will be exploring what it means to be Bengali and Indian.
Okay, what a privilege. And firstly, want to really thank my Indian contingent over here and my CPLJ contingent who've come here. So really means a lot. Feel a tad overdressed and suddenly feel the requirement for a British accent makes everything sound so good. No, genuinely. So, anyways, namaskar, good evening, and hopefully to aid some peace in the subcontinent, I would also say salam, and I'm wearing green, so you know the color of prosperity. Before I start, my father would actually say that whenever you are in a public platform and you're going to say something, try and make it funny. And this afternoon, a lovely girl in my class said that I'm quite hilarious. So I'm going to throw in a couple of jokes. If you guys don't laugh, I would feel very bad because it would confirm my greatest fear that my friends back in India who used to say that I am just not funny, they won, and I would hate that they win. So do laugh. That's a charity for the day. Anyways, identity. Well, the first time I got to understand what identity is was when I was 3 years old, and my mother was bored out of her mind. And I shouldn't say that because she's not easily bored. And because her very boring husband was actually out of town, and I just called my father boring, so there goes my Columbia money. So this video is not going back home. This was early 90s, small town India. The electricity was not there. And I was just about to start school. So my mother says, come, sit down. You've actually learnt all the alphabets and you've learnt a couple of words. So it's time that you learn how to write your name. I was like, I know how to write my name. She's like, no, that's not your name. That's your dark name. And I was like, excuse me? Like, no, that's your dark name. That's your nickname. That's why we call you Babai. That is what we call you at home. You know, you need to start learning the name that the world is going to call you by. That is called your Bhalo Naam. And I was like, excuse me, what is my Bhalo Naam? And that was the day I actually wrote for the first time my own name in bold cursive handwriting. Sion, the one who was born in the evening. Now, that was the day I started my dual identity. And this is very natural for people coming from my part of the country, because in Bengal, you are given the name that your immediate family and your loved ones called you by, and before being christened with the name that the world calls you. So, and as prophetic as it was, my father once told me that as a cocky 20-year-old who was traveling the country, he actually met this saint, and he goes up to him and says like, what are you talking about? You talk about one God, but there are multiple gods in Hinduism. What are you talking about? And this man just turns around with his serene face and says, so, you are a son, you are going to be a father and husband, you are a lover, you are a brother, you are a friend, but you're just one person. And that struck a chord with me, because here I was, going from Babai Sayan, Babai Sayan, Babai Sayan, and I was like changing masks on a daily basis and being this one person and this dual identity. And oscillating between them every single day. There was never consistency, but this movement was what was always happening. And I would just constantly keep thinking that, well, who am I? And then to add to the mixture of that, my father kept moving around the country, and I kept meeting new people who could never pronounce my name. And so, without my permission, there used to be permutation and combinations of my new name which my friends would call. And finally, in college, my best friend started calling me Supru, which is taken from my middle name, Supratim. Yes, I'm burdened with a very long name. And then I was called Granny. I'm not kidding. I used to take care of the drunk and hungry in college, so I was called Granny. So I have multiple names. But the fact is that when my name was chopped off and I kept on getting these new names, I kept feeling deficient, incomplete. And this is the feeling that I carried with me all throughout my life. Why? 6 cities in India, one after the other, kept on moving. And if you know a little about India and you know how diverse it is, moving from one region to another is like moving from one country in Europe to the other, with a different language and a different lifestyle. And so I remember in every single school, I had to learn the regional language. So just imagine, as a 5-year-old, my father's colleague, after hours, wants to beat me up because I'm as stupid can be. And he's teaching me a new language, but he cannot. Why? Because I am his boss's son. Yes, something to laugh about. Well, my friends, they were right. Anyways, so this happened. I learned the language, 5 years. You know, I learned how to read, how to write, how to say this language. I was my mother's interpreter when she would fight with the shopkeepers and the domestic help. Not kidding, seriously, so much fun. And then my father decides to move from the east to the west. Another language, another set of circumstances. And then my neighbor wants to teach me this new language, and she still cannot beat me up because I'm that bad at it. I survive. And then my father moves the third time, and this time I say, I am not learning that language. I am sorry. Hindi works. And so, why was this happening? I would constantly keep thinking about it. But this was happening because I would never assimilate. I was never one of the locals. I was always Bengali over there. And this Bengaliness continued everywhere we went in our suburban home. Bengal was always alive. And my parents would actually go to Calcutta once a year and buy tapes and books and films and magazines and would come back and they would read and listen and watch these films and magazines and books and tapes throughout the year, so much so that they would scream at them, "Mr. Das, can you please ask Mrs. Das not to watch this film for the 20th time? I am dying replaying the same dialogues again." The same books again and again till they were torn. I felt that, Mom, this is not Harry Potter. Relax. This is just Rabindranath Tagore. Get over it. You know, if I read Harry Potter 20 times, I can imagine that. It's entertaining as hell. I mean, Rabindranath Tagore, not so much. But this is what was happening. And then when cable television started, they used to watch Bengali news. And then they would debate and discuss amongst themselves. But I was never invited for that. And for once I realized that I was not Bengali enough in my parents' eyes. So obviously I was not Bengali enough for the world. And this stark bit of identity became even clearer when I actually started making friends and started living in one city for a longer time. This was Chandigarh, where I'm from. And all my friends were Bengalis, but were raised in Punjab. So they actually would oscillate between Punjabi, Hindi and Bengali without the burden that I would carry of trying to be Bengali, which my parents had imposed on me without as much as saying it, but sort of like practicing it. And I would just keep thinking that this is just unfair. And one night when it actually struck me was when we were eating. And we Bengalis eat with our fingers, you know. So we make a dough of the rice, and then with our thumb, we push it into our mouth, which is lovely. And here these people were eating rice with the spoon. And I was like, genetic mismatch, no, harakiri, just get out of here. But they were comfortable with it, and I wasn't. And you know, after such dinners, because we use turmeric in our food, our nails are sort of like softly glazed with the turmeric, and which is very stubborn, refuses to go. And I kept on thinking that, wow, that's like what my parents are doing to me. You know, that stubbornness of being Bengali, it refuses to leave me. But it is there. And it was only then later in the evening, you know, when we would go out dancing in our annual festivals and we would dance. And that is when I would, not knowing the dance, I would still know the movements. And I would be like, I would forget that I am not Bengali enough. That my understanding of my language is incompetent. That when I go to Calcutta and I look at the hoardings, I cannot decipher each and every alphabet, but I give my own representation. And then within minutes, I realized that the two people sitting behind, my parents, would actually replace my representation, the faulty representation, with the educated representation, which was true. And I would keep thinking, who am I? To me, India is an odd ball of sketches. Bengal is a blank sheet of paper because I don't know. The world, thanks to porous borders, is attainable, but it is so far off. So much so that I used to actually study in the UK before this, and I would go in there. The first couple of days I would just listen to myself speak. And English, which is so common for us, at least urban Indians, English in our ears would be like, in my ears would be like, what are you saying? You're in front of the British. They have such good accents. You are sounding terrible. And it would take me some time to acclimatize to me speaking in that environment. And you know what? When I would feel comfortable, 4 or 5 months later when I was returning and I would sit in the flight and an Indian air hostess would speak to me and that accent would come back to me and I would be like, yes, I think I belong here. So I don't belong anywhere. Where am I from? I have no idea. And I think coming to Colombia, while on my way over here, I was on my flight and I was writing, you know, kids were screaming, so you can't sleep. Hate kids. And I'm sorry, my friend is going to get married over here. Imagine me telling to her kids that, I hate kids. Anyways, so I kept writing and I just wrote this one line that to find my identity is a chore I must invest in. And that is what I am actually doing in Colombia, is to find myself a little bit, hopefully. But I know this is not going to happen because it's a continuous cycle. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sayan. Next up, we have Julian, and Julian will share with us a tale about anger management.
Hi. My name's Julian. I'm a junior in Columbia College. I'm super happy to be here. All of these stories have been ridiculously incredible. Thank you guys so much. And I'd love to tell you all a little short story about myself. So last week I was on the subway, in a rush to a meeting downtown. I was also writing an email that was late, so in my lap I had my laptop and my phone and my backpack, and when my train pulled up to the station, I didn't realize it was my stop until I turned around and saw that it was, and at that point I had 3 seconds to get from my seat to the platform. So I scooped up all my stuff and bolted out the door, and when I did, I bumped into this guy. And this man was about 30 years old, much bigger than me. And in his arm, he had a child, an infant. And when I bumped into him, I bumped into the child as well. And the man says, "Say excuse me," and he hits me in the back of the head. Not too hard, but hard enough that you could hear it. And I walked up the steps as fast as I could, and I said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And as I walked up, I thought about some of the things that I could have done instead. I could have turned around and I could have said, "Fuck you." I could have looked at him, then looked at his child, then back to him, and been like, "You're going to be a terrible father," and then walked away. That would have been great. But I didn't. And I've been told by a lot of people that one of those ways of retaliating is the right way to go. My parents have told me to stand up and fight when I see something wrong. Coaches have told me, have some balls, grow a pair. Even my presidential candidates, one of them advocates violence on a daily basis, but the other one, her favorite story to tell, is when she beat back some bullies on her neighborhood block. But I didn't. I just sort of yielded. And I could say that was because I'm too small and I didn't want to fight the guy or something. But it was really because I was just tired. I'd had a long day. I was stressed out. I was running on 3 hours of sleep and 2 cups of coffee. You guys probably know how that feels. And I didn't want to deal with it. And I think that if I look into the future, at least for the next couple of years, I'm going to be pretty busy as I was on the subway. I'm not going to have a lot of time, and I'm not going to have a lot of time in my life as well. And with that time, I want to be doing 2 things. I want to be doing what I want to do, and I want to be nice to people. The next time someone bumps me or pushes me, I might just yield again. I might say, "Okay," and walk away. The next time someone yells at me or steals my seat in Butler Library or does some other thing that assholes do, I might just smile and say, "Have a good day." I might just yield because the universe has too much fucked up stuff in it. And you could say that the opposite is true. You could say you need to push back as much as possible, and I would love to talk about that with you, but I don't have a lot of time right now. I'm pretty stressed. I just came from an exam. I have to pee. It's been a long day. So to you all, I yield as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. So our last story of the night is from me. And this story I've entitled "On Open Doors and Jackasses." And this is a story that I filed away in my memory as a story that I plan to tell my grandkids of how much a badass I was when I was a middle schooler. So back in the 90s, when I was in middle school, maybe some of you weren't born then. I don't know. But back in the 90s, when I was in middle school in South Florida, a group of Nigerian, African American, Trinidadian, Guyanese, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indian, and Egyptian Muslims decided to purchase an abandoned supermarket. This abandoned supermarket was in a plaza that only had a church and nothing else. And this abandoned supermarket was on the cusp of a working class neighborhood and two major highways. So these Muslims came together to provide a space for classes and prayer for a growing community. And we decided we wanted to open up by Ramadan. So in order to open up, we had to clean up the space. And I like to think that we provided the neighborhood with some safety and relief, because that space had previously been known to provide a shelter for all kinds of nocturnal activities. So we cleaned up the bloodstains in the back that perhaps were from the meat that was left behind from the market. We scrubbed the floors. We painted the walls again. And we taped to the floors cardboard and placed over the cardboard pink bed sheets that people could pray on. Those days, it was pretty remarkable how safe everyone felt in that space of a growing community. We felt safe, and no one in the staff thought that we needed to check who was coming in and going out. Because it was a new space, we didn't have air conditioning installed, so we used to leave the doors open, the sliding doors, because it was a supermarket. So we'd leave the sliding doors open where the exit was and the entrance was. And as you know, supermarkets usually have windows. Well, actually, if you're from New York City, maybe not, but in the suburbs, back in the suburbs, supermarkets have windows all along the front. So whenever we turned on the lights at night, you could see everything, what was going on. People were praying, kneeling, prostrating. Every bratty kid was running across the hall because they had unobstructed running space. So when the space was finally opened up during Ramadan, my mother decided that year we were going to do Ramadan a little bit differently. In the past, we used to invite our friends to our home, and we would share the breaking of the fast with friends and neighbors, and then we'd get together for the evening prayers. But that Ramadan, my mother decided that she wouldn't just cook for us. She would cook for whoever came to that space. And she would drag her kids with her and her partner, and we would go after school, and we would serve the community, and we would serve food, and we would clean up, and then I would do my homework. I would avoid the creepier guys that were scoping, and if I felt particularly motivated, I would join the nightly prayers. You see, the nightly prayers were comprised of a recitation of the Quran. And it was during that month that it was the first time that I experienced the entire recitation of the Quran. And it was something I immensely enjoyed. And it was something that I never spoke about with my friends at school. Not because I was embarrassed, but mostly because I didn't think that they could begin to imagine what I would proceed to describe. I'd been to some of their fancy churches and their fancy synagogues and seen their suited attendees, and this didn't really come close. You know, cardboard, pink bed sheets, not close. It was also a space in which I was impressed by the vast international knowledge that came to it, its own cosmopolitanism. It was in that space that I learned to eat Nigerian jollof rice, Palestinian maklube, Trinidadian bus-up shot. It was in that space that I learned Arabic from a Bosnian refugee who would wear a swagged-out suit every time he came to the mosque and never pray because he'd go out for a smoke. And it was in that space that I learned from a Pakistani-American teenager that Muslims smoked pot too. Because according to him, the Quran only talks about alcohol, not weed, man. And it was in that space that I learned from a black Muslim guy that Muslims not only dated, but they also cheated on their boyfriends and girlfriends. And it was in that space that I learned from an adult Egyptian man who broke down in front of my 12-year-old self and sobbed, crying about how difficult it was teaching American teenagers when you have an Egyptian accent. And it was in that space that I learned that the Venezuelan family that went to the same high school as me were actually Muslim. And they were of Palestinian descent, and they spoke Spanish and Arabic in a dialect that only their community understood. And it was in that space that I met the most rotten toddlers who would run around the mosque space, and their Bosnian grandmother would chase after them with a slipper. And they would talk about every single thing under the sun except for genocide. It was in that space that I learned so many things. And it was in that space that one Ramadan night that was particularly beautiful, the Imam was really feeling it. He was reciting the Quran in high tones and low notes, and I decided to take a walk. I walked outside, and I started to pace back and forth, really enjoying everything, taking in the breeze, when all of a sudden I saw two shirtless white boys on bikes riding into the parking lot. I was a little bit curious. I looked at them, and I thought, all right, so, they found some space to ride their bikes. And then I saw two Caribbean elderly women come out of their car to join in for the prayers. Before they could enter the mosque, the two boys started to howl at them. They started to howl and bark, like woof, 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 barking. And they began to spin their bikes around these two elderly women. One of them, who was a Trini grandmother, who I knew, and she looked straight in the eyes of one of the boys and said, "You need to learn some manners." And she walked into the mosque. The guys spun their bikes a little bit, continued to howl and bark, and I thought that was it. But it wasn't it. They saw the open doors, and they saw the unobstructed running space, and they decided to take their bikes and ride in through both of the open doors. They rode into the mosque space while everybody was praying. They spun their bikes around all the congregants and continued to howl and bark. Everyone was in prayer. When it's really awkward when you're like this, to be like, whoa, please stop your bikes, right? Because you're like this. So people continued to pray, and the guys yelped and they barked. They made their circle, and they came out again. So I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, all right, this is really messed up, right? So I'm looking at them, and I can't think of anything really good to say or any really good way to respond. So just off the tip of my tongue, it comes out, jackasses. The guys, they turned towards me, and then they stopped their bikes. And when the guy said, "What did you say, Indian girl?" And my throat ran dry. I realized that it was me and them. And the thing that I had separating me from the congregation was a window pane, a thick window pane, and a wall that used to have taped on it sale prices of beef tenderloins and bananas. And I stood there and I looked at them again, and I said, "You're behaving like jackasses." At that moment, it wasn't something that, I was used to saying. It was something I heard my older brother say a lot when he thought somebody did something particularly dumb. But I was voted nicest in high school. It wasn't something that I said in particular to anyone's face quite often. But I was slightly thrilled and slightly scared that I'd found my voice. So one of the guys, he looked at me and he's like, "I dare you to say it again. Say it to our faces. So I said again, you're behaving like jackasses. So then one of the guys pulled out a chain. And he said, you see this chain? And then he shows me the little cross on the chain. This is about Jesus. What? So I was confused then as well. And I was like, what? Then why are you outside and not at the church? And I gestured to the church that was right next to the Islamic Center. And then I said, I don't think Jesus would be too happy with you guys doing this. And then I, mentally imagined myself patting myself on the back for such a polite comeback. But then I beat myself up for not also saying Muslims believe in Jesus too. And then the guys were like, whatever. So I said, you know what? You just saw the whole world in there. You will never, ever travel and see the world like you just saw. So grow up, jackasses. And for some reason, at that moment, the guys, the teenage white menaces who were shirtless, hairless chests, skinny, 15, 14-somethings, turned into polite schoolboys. Maybe they were embarrassed that they were schooled by an Indian girl their age. So one of the guys tried to cover it up and say, whatever, we're leaving. And they biked away. And I walked inside, not really believing what I had just done, feeling a little bit taller and a little bit wiser. And no jackasses ever rode their bikes into that supermarket turned Islamic Center ever again. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for attending our very first StorySpace. If you'd like to follow the Office of University Life, please like them on Instagram, follow them on Instagram and Twitter. You can also visit their website. Their website is universitylife.columbia.edu. And if you want to know more about campus events, you can also upload their app, which is the University Life app. Yes. And hopefully we'll see you at our next event. Thank you.